Welcome to Veronica Live, and we are here with our next guest this morning, and it is attorney Daniel Street. He is an author. He lives in Louisiana, and he's written 3 books called Fake News Exposed about Trump that are on Amazon. And welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing. I know you're a Louisiana guy. I was harassing you yesterday in text, because my husband's a Louisiana texter, but we love the LSU folks too. So tell us about all your background and what you do in Louisiana.
Sure. Well, I have a degree in history from Louisiana State University, and then went to LSU's law schools, the Paul M. Hebert Law Center, and got my law degree back in 1996. I've been in private practice ever since, primarily virtually exclusively civil litigation. I do handle an occasional criminal case. And, I got into writing. I've actually been a writer all my life and just got into political commentary and political writing in the last 3 or 4 years, and it really in the Trump era. And I have to tell you now, where I live is in North Louisiana, about 20 minutes from Ruston, but everybody in my hometown in Monroe, we're ULM, what used to be Northeast or NLU fans. So we have a rivalry with Tech. So no kind words for Tech, except that it's a great school, but I'm always pulling for their athletic side to lose to us.
Yeah. Oh, there you have it. Well, anyways, Trump he's the man of the hour, and you've actually written 3 incredible books because there is so much fake news, Daniel. So how did you end up writing about Trump? I mean, obviously you were a Trumper, and as a lawyer, you're a critical thinker. So take it away.
Well, I've always followed politics. I've always followed it carefully. I was young as a child an admirer of the late President Ronald Reagan. So I knew way back then when I was a kid, I knew that the media was biased against President Reagan and then ultimately just biased against Republicans. And I kind of carried that forward through my adult life. And when Donald Trump announced, when he came down the escalator at Trump Tower, I saw the media just go into absolute frenzy attacking President or then candidate Trump. But what I also noticed is the GOP establishment, the Republican establishment piled on as well. So I started taking notes. I started keeping up with the misinformation, and it literally started as a hobby. Let me see what they're saying today. And then I started compiling the data and compiling what the truth was. And I eventually had so many stories. I said, I could write a book about this. And I wound up writing 3. And to be honest with you, I could write 10 because there's that much misinformation that's peddled by the media about Donald Trump.
So, one of your books, you talk, the latest one about January 6th and the insurrection. And, John and I talk about this all the time. And I guess this week, this grandmother that was praying now is going to be going to prison. I mean, it's just been so out of control. So talk about to our listeners why January 6th wasn't an insurrection. We've had guests on here that were actually there. We've seen videos and people were saying the pledge and singing. And, if somebody held the door open to the Capitol, I would have walked through it, Daniel.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't blame you. I will say, back when the protests were being planned, I told everybody I knew, everybody who asked for my opinion, I said, don't go, because D.C. is such a really unfair jurisdiction for Republicans or conservatives. But listen, the most important thing about January 6th for people to remember is the events of January 6th may have constituted, in fact, in part constituted a riot. It was not an insurrection. Period. I covered that. I've got an entire chapter of one of my books dedicated to that, and there's a host of reasons for it. But consider this. There have been over 1,000 people associated with January 6th and the episodes and the events that occurred on January 6th. Not one of those people has been charged under the federal insurrection statute. And let me say that again. Not one has been charged under the federal insurrection statute. And the reason for that is the government cannot prove that an insurrection occurred. Now, there's a host of reasons for that. Primary among them is federal law has contained a consistent definition of insurrection since the Militia Act of 1795 and the Insurrection Act of 1807. The current embodiment of those statutes still exist. You'd be shocked how similar the language is. But an insurrection actually requires a declaration by the President of the United States directed to the people or entities or organizations that are in an uprising against the United States, giving those people the opportunity to stand down by X time. And so that's actually an executive proclamation. Of course, nothing like that happened in this case. There was no insurrection. And as a practical matter, if you consider like the Webster's dictionary definition of insurrection, this wasn't an insurrection. So what I tell everybody is January 6th was a lot of things. It was not an insurrection, and it certainly wasn't an armed insurrection. I actually cover that in a chapter of one of my books as well. So almost everything the American people have been told by legacy media about the events of January 6th has been propaganda and misinformation. And that includes the United States. I should include the United States Department of Justice.
So, I mean, my thing is, why is it taking so long to get all of the videos I've seen? I mean, people were just strolling through the Capitol, taking selfies with the Capitol Police, and they weren't doing anything crazy.
Yeah, well, good question. There's thousands and thousands of hours of video. Part of the reason no one was able to obtain the vast majority of it is because when the Democrats controlled the United States House of Representatives, and here in recent times, Nancy Pelosi was the speaker, and essentially the U.S. House majority held sway over those videos. And so you had this little game between the executive branch, which would be the Department of Justice, and the legislative branch over who had the videos. And then you get in this dispute about, in a criminal case, so a criminal defendant's charged and says, hey, look, I want these videos produced. Well, the United States Department of Justice said for years, we don't have them. The legislative branch has those videos. We don't have any dominion over them. So they played this little cat and mouse game. And when it finally ended, several months after the Republicans took the House back, and now the videos have been released. Another reason that the Republican majority, when the Republicans gained the majority in the House, they didn't immediately release all the videos, is because there are groups of leftists that are using the videos to hunt down people who were at January 6 events that are yet to be identified and yet to be charged by the government. So that scenario altogether is what really held it all up.
I mean, just going fast forward, I really hope Trump wins in November, and I hope all of these people are pardoned, and so many of their lives have been ruined, and I want them to get some compensation from the government. So, I mean, having researched this, do you not feel that this was just baloney? I mean, we had a guest on that said he felt he was there and that there was definitely plants that were pretending to be Trumpers, and they were more there to instigate, some sort of riot.
Look, I've said for probably the last year that I've been talking about this, that when all the truth comes out, when all the facts are ultimately disclosed, and we will get them eventually, we will find that with respect to the people who were engaged in the nastiness on January 6th, the people who were destroying property and the people who were instigating riots and all that, we'll find that virtually all those people, if not all of them, were either Antifa, federal law enforcement assets or confidential informants, or local law enforcement assets and confidential informants. This was a big setup, in my opinion, and I've actually investigated it, certainly more than most people, but I will say, before what's happened to all the January 6 people, and I mean the people charged with January 6 violations, with so many of them held without bail, and for years in many cases, I would have told the people of this country, if you brought me on the show 3 years ago, I would have said, that can't happen here. I would have promised everybody it couldn't happen. I didn't think it was possible. So what has happened to January 6 defendants has redefined my personal view as a lawyer and what the law is and what is possible and not possible. And I agree with you completely that in the vast, overwhelming majority of cases, the January 6th, the people charged with violations, criminal violations arising out of January 6th have, there's no basis for the vast majority of it. And hopefully they get not only pardoned, but as you indicated, compensated for they're being victimized by the federal government.
Yeah, we had the author of a book on letters from the January 6th prisoners on about a month
American
ago.
Chronicles.
Oh yeah, and you read it's the actual letters from these prisoners that they've sent out, and you read this and you wonder what kind of third world country we live in some cases. I want to ask you about the press specifically, because you've got this really strange dichotomy with the press. They can't help themselves when it comes to covering Trump. In the political world that I'm in, it's called earned media. It's a good thing. The press covers you, right, and you don't have to pay anything for it. But they seem to have this compulsion that they have to cover him, they have to report on him, and they have to try to find some negative aspect of whatever he's saying. And it's astonishing the breadth of the press. And these are people, and I'm talking about people that have known Donald Trump for decades, and yet they attack him as a liar, as a some kind of crazy. And I know that they know better. And I've heard so many people talk about the other Donald Trump, the Donald Trump that cares about people, that goes up and shakes the hand of the policeman that's in the line there for his protective detail or whatever, or call somebody that lost a family member, and offers his condolences, unsolicited, just calls them. There's a human side to Donald Trump that these reporters, you read about all this stuff and it says he's a liar, he's and all this kind of stuff, and it's like he can't be both. He can't possibly be both. So what is it with this weaponization where the government, we've got the Justice Department, the intel agencies, and everything from the Democrats all aligning with the press to come in to try and destroy one person like this? What's going on here?
Well, my theory on that is this. Any time, whether you're talking about, in this case, we're talking about government and politics, but whether you're talking about business, industry, the arts, government, whatever, anytime someone comes in and shakes things up and totally remakes the paradigm, the model for way things are to be done, and really upsets the powers that be in the status quo. Anytime that happens, whoever has their fingers on the trigger, their finger on the button of power, is going to react viscerally, and they're going to overreact and be reactionary and attack. And that's my theory on the reason that there's this kind of organized opposition, vitriolic opposition to President Trump, because he's a person that's changing the way that business is done in Washington. And really, more than anything, what that pertains to is America first, because for probably 50 years, maybe longer than that, arguably, both from economic policy, tax policy, foreign policy, our leadership has led just the opposite. It's America last, and how can everybody on earth take advantage of America? And President Trump came in and said, look, we're going to do things different, and I'm going to renegotiate NAFTA. For instance, President Obama ran in 2008 on renegotiating NAFTA. It was in the North American Free Trade Agreement itself that it could be renegotiated, that parties could leave it with a 90-day notice and blah, blah, blah. He said he was going to do it. He never did. Donald Trump said he was going to do it. He immediately did. And he did the same things with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, if you remember that. So what President Trump said is, we're not going to be taken advantage of, not by NATO, not by the Chinese, not by Canada and Mexico or anybody else. And that unified all of these diverse, disparate interests against him. That's my theory about why there's so much unanimity amongst media, leftist media, government, and industry, in many cases against President Trump.
It's almost like they're irrational. I mean, you just, and when you offer any kind of counterfactual to them, that they seem to lose their mind. I mean, it's an astonishing thing to watch.
So
well, I agree with you, and I'll tell you that a lot of it too. If you think about media, particularly legacy media, the big media, New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, those newsrooms are so far left that people like you and me really can't fathom it. And look, there's a lot of people who believe that form of leftism is actually a mental illness. And if you remember when Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Tom Cotton, a United States senator from Arkansas, was allowed. They published, New York Times published an op-ed from him back during the George Floyd riots back in 2020, and this is a sitting United States senator who's just talking about quelling the riots and whatnot. That was such a revolutionary act. You remember that the staff writers at the New York Times forced the editorial editor out of the newspaper, all right, just for allowing an op-ed to be published by a sitting conservative Republican United States senator. That's how far left those people are. So it's hard for us an average person, to even understand or fathom their mentality.
Well, we saw it when they, all of their broadcasters had a meltdown when they hired Ronna McDaniel. Then they had to fire her the next day. So there's no fair and balanced anything. But I wanted to ask you, because you are a lawyer, and John and I have talked, about all of these court cases, and then I was so worried when Trump was going to have to pay $400 million. I was ready to write checks, send money, and my little $100. And I was very thankful that the appellate court woke up, but and lowered it to $175 million. I mean, you're a lawyer, and then John and I've talked about Fannie, and then she doesn't even she's sleeping with the guy she's hired, and she just gets a slap on the hand, and it just. As a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm looking at these court systems that's supposed to be law and order, and they're, for justice. And there's just been no justice at all. And thank you, Jesus, for that appellate court in New York that lowered the money bond. So how do you see it? This is your world. I mean, I'm so disgusted by these people.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, the damage that the Biden regime and the Democrats in these big cities like Manhattan, New York and in Atlanta, talking there about the DA, Alvin Bragg in Manhattan and Fonnie Willis in Fulton County, Georgia, and then the special counsel, the United States Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney General, the damage that these groups of people have done to the law, to the respect and honor that the people of this country have in the law, and to the confidence that the people of this country have in the fair, balanced, and even-handed application of the law. It would take 30 years of doing things the right way to regain that lost credibility. I have to tell you what I've seen waged against President Trump. I expect it from some radical leftist group that files a lawsuit over blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's an outlier. But this is the United States Department of Justice. And then you've got the Manhattan DA and you've got a DA in Fulton County. That's the equivalent of my local DA charging President Biden with something. It's just ludicrous. It's so above the pay grade of these people in Georgia and New York, in my opinion. And it's,
right.
I will say it's a dark time in the not just the practice of law, but just for the law and for the rule of law and for the confidence the people of this country have in the law.
It's almost become like a roulette, depending on where you live at, how the law will be applied to you, what your politics are, which, I never thought I would, I'm 69. Okay. I've been around a little while. I've never seen anything like it. And my opinion of the law in the last 2 years has changed radically. I mean, radically. I would I would never live in a state like New York or California, because if I ever got caught doing anything, in the politics or any aspect of it, it doesn't matter, that you're guilty. And I keep wondering, where are the adults? When are the adults going to show up and restore order to this system? And it's like the appeals court stuff. It's like Trump. This judge, a judge finds him guilty, no chance to defend himself whatsoever, makes an outrageous. There's nobody defrauded. Okay, there's no victims.
That's correct.
And yet he finds him guilty of fraud.
I mean, I'm scared to death, Daniel,
Right,
and I've lived in a third
lost,
world country, and this
right,
is how their law systems are.
Right. Nobody lost any money, and yet he gets fined, $500 million. And it's like, oh, by the way, you can't appeal unless you put up a bond of $500 million.
Well, and on top of that, he can't do business in New York City.
Right, in New York.
His children can't do. They've been fined $4 million each. Their hands are tied. I mean, we are banana republic fully. I'm so distraught, and I'm not even a lawyer.
But where are the adults to come in and say that this is not the way American justice works?
Well, good question. The hope is that there's some adults in the higher courts in New York. You've been talking about the Court of Appeal reducing that bond from $465 to $175 million, which is still an outrageous bond, in my opinion. But the other thing that the Court of Appeal did too that has been missed by the media and just not reported on by the media, the Court of Appeal stayed every other aspect of that judge's ruling, of Judge Erdogan's ruling, except for the monitoring of the businesses. So that thing about, the Trump organization can't apply for loans into banking institutions in New York, and the Trumps can't serve as officers. All of that got stayed by the Court of Appeal. And I can tell you, I've been a lawyer now for 27 and a half years. That is an extraordinary measure for a Court of Appeal to take. So now, it was an extraordinary judgment in the first place, but the Court of Appeal said, wait a minute, we're going to stop all of this until we get a chance to look at it. So hopefully, just common sense, decency, equity, and the rule of law will prevail there in New York. But I think that the fundamental thing that I try to mention every time that case comes up, I wrote about that case on my Substack. I wrote about the excessiveness of the fines under the Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution. But the most important thing for people to remember is what the court ordered there was disgorgement. And disgorgement is ordering a party to give up profits. And the reason they're wanting President Trump and the Trump organization to give up profits is because there were no people who lost any money. In fact, all of the lenders were paid back. They were paid back on time, and they all made money and said they would love to do business with the Trump organization moving forward. There were no victims in that case. And all the claims is that President Trump and his team overvalued these different properties, the value of the asset. But no one got harmed by that. And that's a debatable point.
I agree. I agree.
No one got harmed. And that's anytime I talk about this, so let's start with this. Nobody got harmed. The court couldn't order President Trump or the Trump organization to compensate anybody because no one lost any money. In fact, they all made money. So that really encapsulates how unfair and how really just how the law was turned on its head by the Attorney General in New York and that New York District Court, or what they call a Supreme Court in New York, but it's a district court.
Well, that's the part that surprised me, because it's like they're saying, okay, so you have to there's the restitution aspect, which is what they're claiming, and yet the money goes to the state of New York, which wait a minute, the state of New York was not harmed, so is it a fine? But wait, you can't.
They're fleecing Trump for money
that much, So I mean, they're just twisting the law to make it unrecognizable almost.
That's right. And you see that in case after case after case in which President Trump has been targeted. Look, even Jeb Bush, former governor of Florida, I'm sure y'all are well familiar with him. He wrote an op-ed in I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, and said, look, there's not a case under this particular statute, this persistent fraud statute, the New York statute they were using to target President Trump. He said, there's not a case reported in which there were no victims, no financial victims. And that's true. I pointed that out. And actually, in the Substack I wrote, I said, look, because I searched it on a legal database. It pulled up every single case citing that statute. There's not a single one. And there's only about 56 is my recollection. There wasn't a single case in which there were no financial victims. This is what we call a matter of first impression. It's the first time anyone had been targeted in that fashion. And we see that over and over again. In the documents case against President Trump down in Florida, the federal indictment, in the D.C. indictment, in the Fulton County. In Fulton County, no one's ever been charged. No RICO, this is Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organization Act prosecution has ever been made against people who did not have a criminal enterprise intended to deprive people of property and things. Never been done before. So we have all of these we call it res nova, which is a new thing in the law. These issues of first impression that have never been done against anybody, all coordinated at the same time in courts all over the country against President Trump.
Well, and we've had to learn the word lawfare. That's our new word of the last 2 weeks, lawfare. And I mean, they've been mentioning the court case in Florida is going to be moving forward. So like now I'm nervous about that one, and I'm with John. Where are the damn adults in the room?
The thing is, Daniel, is Veronica and I are both military and have had clearances and stuff and lots of training and handling classified material and all that kind of stuff. And this, back to your thing about they keep twisting stuff and coming up with unique applications. But, the president, this whole classified document thing, I'm stunned that, back to where are the adults at, the president has the ultimate classification, declassification authority. If he says
not Biden, who had all of those by his, and all his locations.
Who he stole the documents, by the way, because that's the only way he had them in his possession. But right. Trump was legitimately, if he says this document is declassified, nobody can override him. There's no law. That's his right as the executive authority. That's part of his core executive authority. As soon as he says it's declassified, it's declassified. He doesn't have to write a memo. He doesn't have to go get some bureaucrat's approval. It's just his word is all it takes. And to have these people come in and say, "Oh, we're going to prosecute you under the Espionage Act." I'm like, are you freaking crazy?
Yeah. Well, one thing I always try to mention, I've actually written on the documents case as well. I consider it to be a Presidential Record Act case. We can talk about that, but one thing that's very critical. And it gets overshadowed a lot, both by the way that the special counsel frames the issues and the way the media has framed the issues. I always try to remind people, President Trump, in the Florida federal documents case, in that indictment, has not been charged with any classified document violations. So it's very, very critical to remember that, because there's a series of statutes about mishandling classified documents, and President Trump hasn't been charged under any of those statutes.
I thought they charged him with espionage. Was that, maybe I misunderstood?
No, that's the Espionage Act. He has been charged under the Espionage Act, but
oh my gosh,
he's been charged with unauthorized retention of national defense information under the Espionage Act. And national defense information under the Espionage Act does not have to be classified. And the reason this distinction comes up, and the reason that, in my opinion, the special counsel and the media conflate all of that, is because it is incredibly difficult particularly in these circumstances, for the government to prove. We're talking about 133 documents by last count that President Trump had that had classified markings. If you go read the indictment says this document had classified markings and this document had classified markings. That doesn't mean the document was classified at the time that President Trump had it. And the reason for that is, for instance, a good illustration. Probably everyone's seen the FISA warrant that was issued against Carter Page, if you remember that, during all the Russia collusion hoax. So the court is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and the act is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. That warrant has stamped all over it, top secret, for your eyes only, all that stuff, tap, tap, tap. If you pull it up, it's all over it. But the document's not classified anymore. You see, it's not illegal for me to have it on my computer. It's not illegal for you to have it either. So they didn't charge Trump with classified document violations. They charged him with possessing national defense information without authorization. And the real problem they have with that is, number one, no president in the history of this country has been charged under that provision of law, 18 U.S.C. 793. That's number one. Number two, President Trump was authorized. Everybody agrees, even the special counsel agreed, that President Trump was authorized at least up until some certain date to possess the documents. So that's the other issue with it. Now, I really believe it's a Presidential Records Act case. That gets kind of down into the weeds. I'll be glad to talk about it. But it is, once again, as we keep talking about, a novel use, a new use, a issue of first impression being targeted at President Trump that has never been used to target anyone in the past.
Well, I feel, Daniel, they're just throwing mud at the wall, seeing what sticks, because they want the headline. It's all about the headline, because the silly people that don't read news every day think that this is all real. But I wanted to ask you, because you've written 3 books, and I know you're writing the 4th one really right now too, probably. What was the most shocking discovery when you really dig deep into all of these? I mean, you've written in your books about the Hunter laptop, the COVID injection with bleach, you just all of it. You've
right.
You've gone to all, you've seen it all up close, and you've been digging deep. Was there anything that was really shocking that the public doesn't know? Because John and I, we read everything, and all along this has just been such fake news about Trump everywhere. So we have clarity.
Yeah, I would say the most shocking thing in the course of researching the books and writing the books, the most shocking, and it's not one individual piece of information. It's the orchestrated cacophony of propaganda and misinformation directed at President Trump over the Russia collusion hoax. Now, anyone who wanted to take the time to do a deep dive into it could access all of this information. So I'm not, this isn't a revelation, but what is really shocking about it is what we saw with Russia collusion was really a Democrat Party Hillary Clinton campaign contrivance that was then, we could talk about that because it's really fascinating, but basically they conjured up this narrative and then hired some contractors to try to develop it and further, and then peddle it to federal law enforcement through a series of, people who are all interconnected in the United States Department of Justice and the FBI and the intelligence agencies and with the Democrats. And so, to me, the Russia collusion, really what Russia collusion was the precursor to the lawfare that the president's facing now. They just didn't do anything other than appointing a special counsel that got them nowhere, but it was literally the Clinton campaign. The DNC hires Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS, and they hire Christopher Steele. Christopher Steele cooks up all this hocus pocus and starts trying to peddle it to the FBI and to the Department of Justice, and then so did Glenn Simpson. And then we got Hillary Clinton, who paid for it all, by the way, while her law firm, Perkins Coie, literally launders the money and files Federal Elections Commission documents. They got fined a couple $100,000, if I recall, 300, I forget, for their false filings, claiming that it was legal fees. It was really $1 million paid to Fusion GPS to cook up this misinformation about Donald Trump. And you got Hillary going everywhere acting like this, well, this is unbelievable. Trump needs to be investigated, and she's the one who cooked it all up.
Well, I'm disgusted that letter that came out from the 50 intelligence officials saying that it was all true. And I feel like, and John and I talk about this a lot, that everything, we're like in some sort of script and it's a long ass, story that we've been trapped in, because everything seems so fake to me, from the laptop to J6, insurrection, and it just continues. So I'm like, when is this movie over? It's a horror movie that we're trapped in. And I just can't believe all of these people are such liars and have supported this horror story.
Yeah, well, look, I agree with you completely, and I'll tell you that what's even worse is there's no accountability. And good for instance, you remember the Trump Tower episode. The Trump Tower episode took up about 8 or 10 pages in Mueller's report, and that's where the Russian lawyer came in and told Don Jr. and at the time Paul Manafort, and I forget who else. I want to say Jared Kushner was there, and said, "Hey, I got some dirt on Hillary Clinton." So they had this meeting. Well, that lawyer was under contract with Fusion GPS, and she met with Glenn Simpson the day before the Trump Tower meeting. And then she met with Glenn Simpson after the Trump Tower meeting, except that second meeting was in Washington, D.C. So what do we know? That was all contrived. It was a setup.
Yeah, setup.
And of course, guess what? It's not illegal that you have a First Amendment right. A candidate has a First Amendment constitutional right to obtain information of whatever kind he or she wants about his or her opponent. There was nothing illegal about it. That's why no one was charged with anything. And not to mention the fact they didn't pay anybody. But even if they had, Hillary Clinton and the Clinton campaign and the DNC paid Fusion GPS $1 million, who paid Christopher Steele to concoct the misinformation. So obviously that can't be illegal either. But people don't realize that so much of what the media breathlessly reported endlessly over and over and over during Trump's administration about Russia collusion was literally balderdash that the Clinton campaign and the DNC had bought and paid for and then peddled. And the federal government took it. And just look at how they got it to the DOJ. You got Bruce Orr, who was the Deputy Attorney General in the United States Department of Justice. His wife worked, Nellie Orr, worked for Fusion GPS. And then they bring the stuff to him. And it's
so are you not disgusted? I mean,
hey, we're still waiting for Adam Schiff's evidence. He's got the goods.
Yeah.
Well, so I wanted to ask you too, because DOJ and FBI, they're definitely compromised. And you've been researching this, and John and I, we talked to all of these conservative guests, and so glad you're with us today. But like the November election, to me, it's like a life or death thing. If we don't win this in November, our country is, I think, gone forever. And then if we win it, and we better win it, we've got a lot to clean up, because we've got all of these Obama people and Biden people that are now in the FBI and DOJ. And how do we clean it up? And it's the election of our lifetime in November. I fully feel. So what are your thoughts on that, Daniel?
Well, I definitely believe that the election in November is the most consequential, important presidential election of my lifetime. And I was born in 1971. So in fact, I'll be 53 years old tomorrow. Okay. So
happy birthday.
Thank you. Look, we definitely have to win that election. Now, I will say this. I am not I try not to be doom and gloom. This country and the people of this country are far more resilient than even I ever anticipated. I didn't think we'd survive 8 years of Barack Obama, and we came out of that. So I don't want to say that we can't survive 4 more years of Joe Biden, but I will tell you that if we don't turn things around soon, particularly with respect to the foreign invasion we have going on in this country, and I can tell you, we're about 14 hours from the border, the Texas-Mexico border, and we're seeing significant issues with the illegals where I live. everything from showing up in school, showing up, criminal activity, to people just walking around on the street, with nowhere to live. And, and that's a disaster waiting to happen. And if we don't get a handle on that, there's going to be real problems, and it's going to be very challenging to try to straighten them out. I don't want to say it will be impossible, but absolutely, without a doubt, November is a watershed moment. It's a crucial moment in the history of American politics, and we need President Trump to win so that he can try to right the ship. Now, he's got a lot. I think he'll be better prepared this time than he was last time. Mm-hmm. But he's still going to he'll still have to fight all these entrenched institutional bureaucratic interests that are going to battle him at every turn. And so it's going to be more of what we saw in his first term, with misinformation, government insiders undermining his administration and all of that. But I'm hopeful that he'll be more effective. But we have one thing that's important. We have to remember, if President Trump wins in the fall, in 2 years, he'll be a lame duck. Okay, so he really has 24 months to implement his policies. Now, obviously, he can use the whole term to try to correct the deep state issues, but he's got 24 months for policy, because after that, everyone starts moving on to who the next president's going to be. So we're talking about a very, very narrow window to try to correct an enormous amount of problems.
So, Daniel, have you had any blowback writing this? I mean, because it's hard to be a Trumper out there sometimes, because everybody always hates us. And so I'm just wondering, how's that been? I mean, you've written 3 books that, expose these lies.
Yeah, I'm a little bit, not too much in with respect to blowback. And one of the good things is the part of the country I live in, North Louisiana, is very conservative. And President Trump won North Louisiana by, I'd have to go back and look, to be honest with you, I want to say well over 20 points in 2020. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 23 points is my recollection. He is a powerful force here. And so me personally, I've had a few people who mostly ill-informed, uninformed. And that's one of the beautiful things about my books, because I carry them around with me everywhere I go. And if somebody says something, President Trump told people to drink bleach. No, he didn't. I pull it out and show them the receipts. No, that's not what happened here. And the thing is, people have a very strong reaction to having been lied to. So I've seen that on juries. If a party comes in, whether it's a litigant or a witness or even the lawyers, and they lie to the jury, if you prove to the jury this was a lie, this was misinformation, jurors will just drop the hammer on those people. And the average person does the same thing. So when you show somebody, hey, that's not true, that's not what President Trump said, that's not true, that's not what President Trump said, you'd be amazed how many of them convert. Now, they don't always convert to Trump voters.
Right.
But they'll convert to, hey, why are those people lying to me? And I always tell them, they're lying to you because President Trump, like him or hate him, he wants to change how things are being done and to do things moving forward that are only in the best interest of this country. And that is revolutionary. And once you embrace that and believe that, then you understand why he's attacked so viciously and so relentless.
Well, it's just so sad. I don't understand why the Dems want to kill babies and they don't want Americans to be first. It's just, and we're the invasion at the border is so out of control. So I know we're going to wrap up here, Daniel. So I hope you have your resume in for the Trump administration, because I need you at the DOJ. And I know that he's accepting resumes, and I highly recommend you, just so you know.
Well, I appreciate that. I will tell you, I don't see that in my future. Obviously, if the president of the United States, Donald Trump, wins the election and he calls on me to serve, and so that's not going to happen. But if he did, obviously, I would do everything I could. But I can tell you, the last place I want to be is the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington.
Well, we need you there. We need you. So is there any final thoughts? I know your books are on Amazon. Fake News Exposed About
Sure.
Trump, Daniel R. Street. You're on Substack. I liked your Twitter stuff, so I'm definitely an X person now. I'm going to be following you all the time. And I'm going to be calling you to come back because this has been a riveting discussion. What are we missing, Daniel?
Well, I tell everyone the best thing to do if you want to follow what I'm doing is to go to my website, and that's just danielrstreet.com. There's links to my social media. There's links to my Substack, and my Substack's free. It doesn't cost a dime. And you can, and I can, the good thing about Substack is I can address things that are happening now, whereas when you write books, by the time the book comes out, it's all dated. So the Substack's more immediate. There's links to my books, and your audience right now can go to my website at danielrstreet.com and get my most recent book. It's got fake news. It's got COVID misinformation. It's got misinformation about, if you remember, the Don't Say Gay law in Florida,
right.
The Martha's Vineyard flights, the stuff about Governor DeSantis, all of that. They can get the digital version or the electronic version or the audio version for free.
Fabulous.
Can't do better than that.
Yep.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Daniel, and I'll be calling again because you are definitely a warrior in the trenches, and we hope to be at the finish line with you November 5th. Glorious.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me on. And I tell everybody the reason that we have the opportunity for the people of this country to get the truth is there's so many people like you who are willing to share the truth with people. So thank you for all you're doing.
Well, thanks. And God bless you. And we'll be right back on Veronica Live.